So I experienced those things, whether anybody else likes it or not. For me, it's not a belief. That was an experience for me. You know, the little guys in my bedroom are perhaps in some ways less believable because it might have been a dream, except that it seemed to be a recurring dream over a few weeks. 20 years later, seeing a picture of what it was that I saw in my bedroom on the front cover of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, that was an ontologic shock for me, where I just dropped the book literally sitting in the used bookstore there. You know, there's many ways that you can structure a standard model of physics or a model of physics where points in 3D space are actually closer to each other or interacting with each other in ways that allow apparent information transfer across space and time that don't require some intermediate transmission of electromagnetic waves. You know, our brains sit in a quantum foam of space-time. We are just organized space-time. So we interact with each other via quantum fields. So
now we're moving into a new presidency. They've stated they're going to be disclosing everything. They're reviewing budgets and disclosing everything from JFK to MLK to the orbs and everything in between. How does this impact Soul Foundation? How does this impact your dreams and hopes for next year? Tell us about the foundation and how you are excited about applying the scientific community and the governmental funding and to our future.
You know, I saw first on Twitter, if you will, I don't know, 5-7 years ago, and I said, look, if you guys don't get professional about this, no scientist is ever going to take you seriously. And if you don't frame your postulates as hypotheses, and if you don't stop calling them conclusions, then people aren't going to ridicule you, or people aren't going to continue to ridicule you. So it's like, and that made me realize that, you know, there needed to be a formalization of it, first of all, which I, you know, campaigned about over several years about how to talk the science. But then there needed to be an organization which could bring scientists together and create a perimeter within which the science could be reasonably discussed, even if it's just, you know, an explorers club for fun of let's just all sit around and have a beer. But what I found happened, having set that up and done so with the right balance of individuals, so, you know, Peter Skafish, David Grush, myself, you know, that brought in the kind of high level expertise and formalities. I mean, Peter more in the philosophy and anthropology area than I was, because that's at least half, if not more, of the problem. And David as the person with the sort of who kick-started, along with Lou and Jay, who's kind of a hidden, or was a more hidden figure until recently. The discussion, again, in a formal way, that Dave and Jay and Lou said, we have the data, or the data exists. And so I'm there to say, okay, well, let's structure the data in a way that other scientists can talk about it. And here's what you need to do. You need to write papers. You need to do the boring part of getting peer review, because then it's referenceable, and then it becomes a foundation for more studies and something that is you can point back to and say, hey, look, this has already been done and proven. You don't have to redo it. And that's how science operates. And then, of course, you know, Peter's there to take on the more social aspects of what it means for humanity in a bigger way. And so, you know, I'm beyond thrilled, frankly, as to where we are with it. I never expected it to succeed as much as it has. But I think that the success is not because of us. it's because of the burning need of what was required and what everybody knew was required. And once they saw that it was there, they're like, ah, that's it, let's follow them. And what came of it was even better. It, in a way, helped instantiate many other groups. And so now there's a cottage industry of groups, each of which has their own niche and their goals. There's a scientific coalition of UAP research, which brings together groups of whole groups of scientists to organize around it. There's John Priestland's group, Unhidden, which is about the psychological aspects. There's the John Mack Institute for Experiencers. There's Ryan Graves for the flight issues with with both military and commercial pilots. And then there's UAPDF, the UAP Disclosure Fund, which at least was the initial discussions were around helping whistleblowers legally, but became more a policy institute for working directly with the government. And the whole idea is to create an ecosystem that both commercial entities as well as the government and society can turn to and say that at least there's some experts or some people with professional background that are able to address it. And one of my big interests and part of my goal at Sol is not just to be an academic. I mean, one of the things that I did at Stanford back in the day, and I got a fair amount of flack from as an assistant professor, was saying, hey, look, ideas can become companies and the government doesn't need to fund everything. The government funds the discovery of ideas in an unbiased way. And then you then have the venture community or investment community there to pick up the slack and take it and turn it into commercialization. And so I have been, for the last 5 or 6 years, beating that drum that if any of this is real, the commercial opportunities are extraordinary. The technology represents not just a leap of understanding, it represents hundreds of technology revolutions, any one of which could frankly change the face of the planet, hopefully in a good way. But I mean, just look what a grain of silicon did. A grain of impure silicon or impure germanium is the heart of everything we do today in electronics. So, there are certainly understandings of the universe that need to be appreciated if somebody else has already appreciated them. And even if they're not willing to give us the ideas directly, if we can learn from just observing what they do, we say, okay, well, now that we know that's possible, how can we do what we now know is possible? So, that's really what Sol is meant to be. It's meant to be the same A to Z, play with ideas and turn them into value that I've participated in and driven for my whole career. And frankly, I mean, I didn't come up with that model. I learned it from my mentors, Len and Lee Herzenberg, and then watching David Baltimore, my other mentor then at MIT for my postdoc, and then at the people around them who were so successful, and say, okay, well, how are they successful? I see what they did, or I see aspects I think I understand, and let me try to replicate it and bring my flavor to it. Skywatcher is an organization that I've been with since its beginning. I don't speak for them. They've been speaking for themselves quite a bit lately, and I'll let them, the formal, the officials of that talk about the goals of Skywatcher. But when I participated in the first event, I was really just there as a neutral observer, first to make sure that nobody jumped to conclusions on things, but also just to, I don't know, provide a scientific framing for how the questions are asked. And it's not that the people who were there are in any way naive or stupid. It's just that the majority of them had military backgrounds and were involved in so-called retrievals of prosaic material and then others. But they, in the course of their careers, had met and or seen things that were sufficiently anomalous that they had those kinds of aha moments that said, okay, well, since nobody's going to be doing this from a governmentally but public-facing posture, well, there's no reason we can't do it. There's enough information out there already that we don't have to bring things that we know about how to do on the inside to the outside, because we can basically point to public approaches and use what's already free on the internet to approach this, and including things like, as you first asked at the top of the hour, psionics, at least the claim of it. You know, the question you ask about, you know, can you enhance? I mean, that is part of a discussion in the group, and I won't talk for other people who could talk it better than me. But it was from the very beginning in my mind, once you localize a function in the caudate putamen that might be involved in the processing of information, if not the actual, let's say, antenna. I don't think the caudate putamen is the antenna. I think it's a processing function, and that the information is somehow, if it's real, impinged across the brain, and then it's coordinated in the caudate putamen, and that's actually what caudate putamen does with senses. It takes all your senses, incorporates them into a structure downstream of executive function that says, this is what I need to do. And then unconscious functions that say, react to that flash of light, or react to that leopard about to leap out of the, you know, out of the bushes at me in a subconscious way, processes it and says, here are the movements and things that you need to do relative to your emotional and memory state. That's for real. That's what the caudate putamen is involved with in what we call intuition. But as I was thinking about it, it became kind of obvious to me that if you needed to place a coordination of the information that might come as an additional sense, or a sense that we don't understand, it was still going to have to go through the same routing system. There's no need to evolve a whole new system if you've already got one in place onto which you can overlay the same kind of information. So that obviously, you know, you just need to be paying attention to even lay literature, that there are ways that you can stimulate the brain from the outside, whether that's via drugs that change the nature of how nerve pulses operate. Things as drastic as DMT and LSD and the whole tryptamine family and beyond, to electromagnetic transcranial stimulation that's been around for a couple of decades now, and now ultrasonic stimulation of the brain in ways that don't fry the brain, but yet turn on or off various regions, and it's now known that you can do that. So it's an obvious next step to say, okay, well, if this part of the brain is involved in, let's say, claimed remote viewing or claimed psionic interaction with entities from beyond, why don't we try stimulating it and see if it gets any better or worse? But here's the problem. People might do that in their garage, and God knows what that does to people, right? You don't want to be messing around with your brain. You don't want to be the guinea pig So again, stepping back and doing this in a formally scientific way, first of all, looking at the ethics of what you're doing, getting institutional review board approvals, which is the standard way that clinical trials are ever done on humans, where you basically say to a board of experts, ethics and whatever the relevant science is, say, how do you do this? Or this is our proposal. Do you see any holes in it? Do you see where we might get in trouble doing this? Like, for instance, you don't do it on children. And even with parental consent, because, you know, consent really means you understand. Consent doesn't mean that somebody let you do it. So, you know, you really have to understand what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you put it together in a way that the time and money and effort spent doing it is not wasted, so that you try to fill all the potential loopholes ahead of time and the mistakes you could have made, so that you don't waste anybody's time in the process of carrying it out. So yeah, I mean, and again, I now know of many groups trying this, and it's not just, you know, the people that I'm most immediately talking to, and that's exciting, again, because I think Sol and other people who've been moving this has created a permission structure that is, hey, it's okay to do this. It's okay to ask fringe questions. I mean, I want to reclaim the word fringe and turn it into something positive, not something that gets thrown at you by the New York Post as some sort of declaration of near insanity.
What are your feelings on our human capabilities and our future of having more capabilities as we become aware that we can, right, do these extraordinary things?
I mean, I think it's like playing the piano. Some people are just naturals at certain things. And you know, yeah, I can play the piano, or I can sing, but you better cover your ears when I do either of those, because it's, you know, it's harsh. But when it comes to, you know, math or biology, intuition, you know, that's my strength. So I think you can teach people to do something, or to at least organize whatever capability or level that they have. I mean, I can be taught to play the piano, but you know, I wasn't a Mozart at age 4. And so I think as well, just like with this, you know, people who are born with it. And many of these people later in life say that either I found I needed to suppress it, or I needed to ignore it, or I found a way to manage it. So that's the first part. Now, the second part of your question was about, you know, does the interaction cause it? I think all the interactions might do, unless somebody's reaching into your brain and restructuring how your brain operates, is reveal to you a way to accomplish it. It was always there, you just never realized you could do it. It's sort of like the muscle memory needed to be activated. And so once you realize that you can do it, it becomes easier to do it next time. So I think that for many people, when they have an interaction, there's 2 ways to think about it. One way, they have an interaction, and that strengthens a mental connection approach that allows them to continue to do it. So just like with meditation, I mean, when I first began learning how to meditate, I couldn't do it, but now I can very quickly go into a state where I can clear my mind in, you know, 5-10 seconds. I'm not a meditator. Like, I mean, I can't do it for more than like 10 minutes, but I can clear my mind because I've learned how to do it. So I think that's part of what is going on with some people. But I think for the people, though, who, for instance, there's many stories of individuals who've had some event occur, medical event, and they wake up after this event where now they have this ability, they have some new abilities. And I think one way to explain that is a process of neurogenesis that, you know, two parts of the brain might not have previously been connected, but after damage, you know, oxygen insufficiency in the brain caused nerve damage. The brain does have, now we understand, the ability to regenerate partially. And that might sort of create a network around the damage that connects two areas of the brain in ways that they weren't before. Now, it doesn't happen in everybody just because you got had head trauma, but in the few people that were lucky enough, if you will, to have the damage in the right place, this connection occurs. Maybe, you know, I'm just, again, I always am disappointed in scientists who say, oh, well, that just can't be. It's like, well, why don't you just play with the idea and see where it goes? You don't have to dismiss it dismissively.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, Bud Hopkins used to say, most scientists like to explain the uninvestigated instead of investigate the unexplained. And so I want to ask you, you've been very outward about your own personal experiences, you know, as a paper boy when you were, I guess, 10, and then this experience in England. Hypothetically, perhaps, how much has that informed you and your passion for this subject, and maybe a little shift in your own physiology? Yeah.
I think without those, I wouldn't be here today, without having had those experiences, because as I've often said, there's the anecdote of your experience. An anecdote doesn't mean it's just a story. You experienced something and you know what happened. So you don't need anybody to tell you that, or you don't need to believe anybody who says that you're crazy. So I experienced those things, whether anybody else likes it or not. And so for me, it's not a belief, that was an experience for me. And so the little guys in my bedroom are perhaps in some ways less believable because it might have been a dream, except that it seemed to be a recurring dream over a few weeks. And the 20 years later, seeing a picture of what it was that I saw in my bedroom on the front cover of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, was an ontologic shock for me, where I just dropped the book literally sitting in the used bookstore there. It's just here on California Avenue at an old used bookstore down there. But for me to translate that to other scientists, or for me to prove to other people that it was beyond just an anecdote, requires everything that I'm doing with the Soul Foundation. So, I had what might be thought of as an out-of-body experience, where I woke up and felt like I was in the middle of a star field. I was like, where the hell am I? Kind of looked around. I just sort of felt like my perception was like, where am I? Oh my God, where's home? There was one star that was brighter than all the others. And then I just felt myself sucked down back into my body, and I woke up. And it was one of the most I still remember it. I don't remember where it was, probably in my 30s or something. And so it's just, they could have been some kind of weird dream, but they stick with you. And then they reinforce the things that were real, which was the thing that was most real and can't be explained away as a dream state, was the event as I was a paperboy, where the object went right over my head. So it's like, it's there. It's not provable except in my memory, but my memory is me. And so I don't need to believe something. I know that happened. So everything else is perhaps a confirmation of that. But again, looping back to what I said at the Soul Conference, is how then do I create a story meaning a scientific story of the technology or events or structure of the universe or the structure of whatever it is that's going on that encompasses all of these experiences. And the things and the experiences now of other people, because you can't just rely on your own experiences. So there's something very, very, very complex going on. Relating back to the question about consciousness is, even physicists are freaking out because they are beginning to understand that the universe doesn't happen unless consciousness observes it. And that's a very uncomfortable place for a physicist to be, at least until recently. I think we've reached a stage of science where what is explainable is reasonably well understood, but we're now at the fringe of what we understand. And the only way to explain the fringe is to come up with new science that goes beyond the simple ways that we understand it today.
If you were given a sizable amount of budget with as much researchers as research teams as you wanted to direct yourself, what is your heart's desire to research right now?
It would be two things. I mean, one is materials understanding. Because again, if you want to reach other scientists and you want to reach the lay public, you want to be able to show that there is money for value or value for money put in. And so, again, if such technologies exist, I happen to think that they do based on everything that everybody I've spoken to and the way that people react in the government around this, that understanding that requires a Manhattan Project level study. And it needs to be done outside of the doors of the government. Whether the best place is academics or the best place is some sort of public-private relationship, but you want to do it in a sufficiently transparent way that people see that there's value and movement out of this. So there's the materials aspect, because that kind of gets into the programmable matter point that you just raised of that. I think what he means by programmable matter is, at the very least, the ability to rearrange the structure of material and the components of that material, which are not particles, they're some sort of weird vibration in space-time, or as other people I've been speaking to, some sort of geometric structure of space that explains quantum nature in a different way. And so if you had access to the behind the scenes puppet strings that are matter in some way, if you could reach behind this structure and then just change the relationship of those things, you could program it from behind. It's kind of like you've got a puzzle piece in front of you, and behind the scenes is a puppet master moving the pieces around to make something be what it is that they want it to be. Now, maybe that's done by consciousness. It was Jacques who first shocked me when he said, in talking about and explaining, as a way to explain all of the observations, like I was saying before, that we have on the table in front of us. His comment was, to them, reality is negotiable. And what he meant by that was by whim and by thought or consciousness or technology or consciousness interacting with technology that enables it, they can take a volume of space and make anything happen within it. Again, unimaginable levels of technology or unimaginable ways that it could happen. But it's the stuff of science fiction, and I mean that in a positive way. That okay, if somebody's doing that, what do they understand about the universe that we don't? And so that excites me. So I'm 64, so I'm unlikely to see the end of this story, and I'd be happy if I'm only helped push it along. But I don't know. To me, that's at least part of it. The second part is consciousness, obviously, and so to your point of before of can we reach into the brain and change things? I think before we want to change things, we want to understand things. You don't want to be poking about in people's brains until you understand what you're doing. But if you're getting down to something like the Hameroff Penrose or OR orchestrated reduction approach, or whether there's something else that explains what consciousness is and how it sits in the fabric of space-time. I mean, whether you're a materialist and you think that consciousness is only an illusion of the neurons interacting with each other, there's still what Federico Fagan calls the qualia, and other people have called the qualia of how do you explain what red means and what taste of a hamburger is in terms of consciousness, and how do you encode that in neurons? And so understanding the relationship of how matter creates or allows for consciousness. I mean, it's already well understood now that the brain is not just those neurons. The electromagnetic frequencies that we know happen, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, theta waves, et cetera, are actually communicating from this side of my head to the other. I mean, there are resonance, and if anything, minimally, there's sort of the clock, the CPU clock that keeps the brain, moving in a regularized manner. But we now understand that at that grander level, one side of the brain is talking to the other and keeping it in concert. But we also understand that cancer cells have their own little electromagnetic fields that are different than normal cells, and that you can actually perhaps even detect that as a diagnostic approach. And people are already thinking about using electromagnetic fields to specifically go after cancer cells in tissue. Now, having just had a cancer removed, like literally right there next to my eye, that would have been a far better thing than the giant hole they poked in me, and then they had to reconstruct it. People often say, what's wrong with Gary's face? Because I've had my face reconstructed like 4 times now. Not because I wanted to look prettier, but because I had to remove giant cancers that had, infested my face, because I'm just prone to them. So, I think that is, those are the two things, because if we can understand it at that level, maybe it can help explain schizophrenia. Maybe we can resonate the brain in a way that takes somebody who is otherwise disordered and resonate their brain back into a place where it's working right again. Or maybe we can resonate brains so that we can have an expanded awareness. I don't know. But those are the two areas that I would go after. And if I had the money, I get asked literally every other week to get myself involved with some of these mummies down in Nazca. I think there's maybe something there. There is science that's being done that still has me scratching my head and going, but I don't think it's being done right because the money's not, and I'm not dissing the people who are doing anything. It just needs a sufficiently large research program to oversee it, to get it done right. Like I did with the Atacama mummy. That took a lot of time and effort. Some people didn't like what I had to say about it. But, I think I've proven over the years that I'm not here to debunk. I'm just here to tell data as it's seen. But I've had 4 decades now of working in the sciences, and I know how it should be done. And so to the extent that I can pass on that and create a rubric within which others can learn, that's great. I mean, I have like 8 or 10 of my former students are now professors at Stanford and Harvard and, many other places that I've taught them how to think, how to do science. I mean, they were naturally smart people, but I gave them a method. And so I think there's a method still to be provided to this whole fringe area. Again, I'm going to reclaim that word. This whole fringe area, there's a method to be applied that others can learn. And it's not hard. And I was taught it by my mentors. So, I both, the teachings, I went to Catholic school. So I said it was, and plus I'm Catholic. But all my mentors were Ashkenazi Jews, and they had a particular way of thinking about things that I realized was there's a method there that I can learn. And so, hybridizing those things together, I think has value. There's always, I know what the next question is going to be. There's always value in hybrid, right? There's hybrid vigor where you take the best aspects of one thing and another, you bring them together and you create something new.
Is life an emergent property of creation? And does that life then constitute a form of consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and interestingly, even somebody from SETI just the other day says said it's very likely that, aliens exist because, as many have said, there's billions and billions and billions of planets even, in our local supercluster that have conditions of life, conditions of environment that would allow even life like us to emerge. So the notion of 9 billion years versus 4 billion is that somebody, and it wasn't me, came up with a Moore's law of DNA complexity. So the Moore's law of transistors is that every 5 years, whatever the number is, the complexity goes up by 2-fold, and it's a line going up. Similarly, somebody thought, okay, well, the chromosomes and the gene networks are a circuit, way more complex than any computer we've ever made. They're a circuit, and similarly, you could imagine that there has been from the beginning of time since today a complexity. So what they did was they modeled the complexity of what it would look like going all the way back to, from where we are today. I mean, back to the Cambrian. I think it's the Cambrian explosion, if everybody knows what that is when sort of modules of genes came together in ways that created all these weird structures. And you ever seen a picture of the supposed Precambrian or Cambrian sea? There'd be all these monstrous looking things from which only a few things ended up surviving. But the modularization and the ability to put things together like Lego blocks had come to fruition. But before that, there must have been others. So when they project that back in time, when they cross the x-axis of when time is, so complexity on the y-axis, z-axis, x-axis is time, it crosses at 4 billion years. And that's weird because the universe was created 9 billion years earlier than that, or at least what we understand the universe to be. So the universe has been around for 15 billion years. There was probably enough matter available for something to evolve probably within about 5 billion years. So there's a gap there of about 6 billion years. So you have to propose two things. Either life occurred elsewhere and just sort of hopped a rock and showed up here. And then just as a spore. And so it kind of jump started everywhere because of those initial conditions. Or complexity went through an exponential very quickly at the beginning and then leveled off into a linear line. So those are the two possibilities. It either went like that, or it, from 4 billion years ago, or it say happened much earlier. And so, and people say, well, oh, how reasonable is that? Well, how reasonable is it that the metal in this pen actually is a condensate of supernovas that happened 10 billion years ago and turned into a cloud of atoms and then condensed and turned into a solar system sufficient that somebody was able to mine it? I mean, so the same process that created the metal in this thing is the process that you could imagine allows for, some lucky microbe to make it from one place to another. So I have no problem with it. It's a kind of diaspora. And just look at some of the recent results with deep miners. They're mining material from miles under the earth, and they pull up rocks that have microbes in them that their metabolism is so slow that they divide once every 100,000 years. Okay, well, maybe that was the first, maybe that was the first microbe that hitched a ride. So, and that makes you go back and think again about, well, where did life evolve? People always think of life as having evolved on the surface, in the intertidal zone, and lightning strikes, and boom, the molecules come together, and life begins. Maybe life begins deep under the earth, or deep under an earth, or a place that would be inhospitable to us today. But if you can imagine that, suddenly the place where life can start expands exponentially. It's anywhere there's water and heat and sufficient minerals. So that means life could happen everywhere because there's lots of rocks, that are big enough to have melted water and mineral availability. Now, here's another interesting thing. What is most life made of? Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, and a few of the other, and metals come along, and mostly metals are used in enzymes to help catalyze reactions. That's interesting because the very first elements that ever got made in the first novas or supernovas, carbon, nitrogen, blah, 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 blah. The heavier atoms, uranium, et cetera, took stellar evolution of multiple supernovas. So we're the luckiest downstream owners of those heavy metals, like iron. But those weren't the first of the elements that were around. But life is almost exclusively made of the lighter elements that showed up in the earliest phases of the universe's expansion. So once again, it gives you the opportunity to have life beginning way earlier than it was required for metals to show up.
And it may be an emergent property of creation. Therefore, you're saying it's probably everywhere.
I can't imagine now. I had really a sort of a moment when I read that paper just about 3 weeks ago of these ultra long-lived microorganisms that live deep under the earth. It was like, geez, that means anywhere there was such conditions, which probably exists literally in every solar system that ever was. There's water and heat. And so therefore, the conditions for life are way beyond what we think of as a habitable planet.
Well, you've looked at brains, human brains. How different, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at alien brains, but if you haven't, but if their physiology and neurology is different, they would be able to perceive different levels of reality. Is that correct? Or different types?
But I mean, what's the name of that? Scientist down at UC Irvine, I think is Hoffman, I think is his name, is that, basically his postulate is you only perceive what is evolutionarily necessary for you to pass on your genes. It's no need for me to perceive you as an electromagnetic or a quantum wave function, right? I don't need to see cosmic rays with my eyes because it's not evolutionarily an advantage for me. So basically he's saying is that what we perceive as reality is only enough to allow me to recognize a mate, and have children, right? So, that's the first thing. So the second thing is, and I was watching, we've been watching the TV show Shogun recently, a series on Hulu, I think, and about Japanese culture in the 1600s-ish, and how different they were to the Westerner, a British Westerner who shows up in their thinking style, and what they assumed about reality, or they assumed at least about cultural interactions. So, and you don't have to go to Japan. You can go to any of the shamans or other cultures that their perception and rules of how the universe is are different. They still have the same senses, but they interpret them differently. Imagine that you were something that lived in a place which was dark. Well, you'd probably evolve an intelligence, if intelligence evolves, that might use sound, and use sonar. And we have those on Earth. We have bats, right? We know that sharks and other fish in the ocean use electromagnetics to sense their surroundings. So, what happens when you have an intelligence that uses something like that? And how does that change your structure of reality and the math, the basic assumptions you make? Again, I've been learning about in math, and this is again related to the conversation that I had with this old friend of mine, about quaternions and Tonians, which are, mathematical constructs of, unreal numbers, but are necessary to explain the physicists use to explain reality and transformations in 3 and 4 and 8D space. And it's like, wow, imagine if you had a brain that instinctively understood that, right? I mean, would an avian species be more likely, because they think in 3D much more intuitively, to come up with ways of understanding math that might advance them further than us? Would it be possible for a reasonably intelligent group of dinosaurs to not require technology, but find a way to use their consciousness to transcend and become a kind of civilization that's different than us? I don't know, but it's fun to think about. And you can imagine any other place that, maybe there are somewhere in a far distant star, a race of ascetic monks that, are far better meditators than we ever would be, and have learned how to manipulate space-time mentally. I mean, again, there are these clues in human history and culture that such abilities exist. There's been lots of research that some people believe is sufficient to prove the case, whether mainstream science wants to believe it or not. I can look at the data and go, if this were a paper about cancer, then I would say it's true, because the numbers don't lie. Your interpretation might be wrong. So anyway, I have, I think one of the best movies about it recently was that movie Arrival. And that basically depicted an alien thought process that saw time as something that language could use to transcend your vision of reality. So yeah, I have no, I mean, I expect it. It can't be that everybody thinks like humans, because that's like saying humans think like monkeys, or humans think like the reptiles from which we descended. Yeah, there's an evolutionary process back to that, but we don't think the same. And we hope we evolve and become something different. Humans, 10,000 years from now, assuming we don't, descend into anarchy or otherwise, will be very different than us. We are already different than who we were in the 1500s. So, yeah, and that excites me. I mean, all the science fiction I've ever read, which is basically every science fiction book that ever came across that I've read, was because I was interested in the aliens in those books and the different ways that the authors depicted a thinking process. Some of the best ones that I liked the most were that the thought process or even came from their biology and their evolution, that shaped what they were and how they thought and their perceptions. So yeah, I hope it is. Species evolve best or most quickly when they're separated from the other groups. I mean, Darwin's finches is the perfect example of that. A geographic dislocation, either ocean or mountain ranges, when two groups can no longer intermingle their genes, that allows for one to drive forward or evolve differently than another. I mean, it's just basically because because your environment has changed, either because of genetic drift or because of the the environment changes. You need to adapt. But if your environment doesn't change, like sharks, their environment hasn't changed in several hundred million years, or how long they've been around, and they're apparently the same as they were long ago. They've evolved to a point of near perfection. They don't need to change. What was that? Sorry, what was the question again? I'm kind of like.
But our cultural environment is changing, especially with disclosure. So we may be at that cutting edge of a human evolution based on all these external assets that we are now aware of, like the telepathy tape, all that. Yeah.
Well, others have pointed this out, that because humans adapt their environment to their needs, they don't, and because we don't, and please don't take me wrong, I'm not advocating eugenics, because we don't cull the herd.
Right.
We accumulate mutations. I mean, I have a mutation that causes cancer. That's why I get all these skin cancers all the time. I mean, it flat out causes it. I would have been dead when I was 32, except for medicine. Mm-hmm. I might have been able to pass my genes on, but that would have been the end of things. And so I think civilization and culture slows down evolution. It doesn't stop it, but you've still got the weight of the non-changed contributing their genes to the gene pool. So it's only via separation that you will accomplish this. And so that's one great reason why getting off this planet and getting to other places so that we can isolate and adapt, so, great if suddenly we had starships and we could get groups of people who were like all of one mind about something to go somewhere else 10,000 years from now, come back, you'd probably be very different. But, we're also adapting technology to ourselves. So, very soon, one or more of these ideas that I'm talking about changing brain, et cetera, or Elon Musk's Neuralink company or other things are going to be used. And, I frankly, even with AI today, I use AI for everything. If I could incorporate it somehow into my brain, I would be more an appendage to the AI than the AI is an appendage to me. If I could use it as my memory, because, who are you? You are your memory and the memories that shaped you. But you can't remember everything that happened 15 years ago. I can barely remember what it is that I did yesterday. But if I could have that at my beck and call and part of my memory system where the neurons could be interlaced into that structure, who am I then? I now have that, even with AI today, have vastly different capabilities. And the stuff that I use it for is just like, wow, what a relief. I don't have to have this giant, I edit papers with it. I write papers with it. I use it for ideation of ideas. Ideation of ideas, is that redundant?
Ideation.
And that's in just 60 years. When I was 16, I remember going to one of the first computer labs in Connecticut. It was a field trip from my school. And I typed into the computer that here's a computer. And, I typed in, I said, who was George Washington? Return, error. And so, and so I've used it, but it's like yesterday's computers were like abacuses compared to what we're doing today. And it doesn't mean that AI is conscious. And I don't think that AI is going to be conscious. I think it could replicate consciousness. We're already past the point of can it mimic a human? Yes, is the short answer to that. And look at how fast it's advancing. And give us another 100 or whatever years, we are going to be merging with our machines. And then you're going to have a fight. You're going to have a fight with those people who think it's horrific and unethical and inappropriate and, that we should ever do it. And then there will be those who are going to do it. You have people already today who are fighting genetics. And the use of genetics to modify humans. There's a prohibition, of course, worldwide against it. But who's to say it's not? I'm not saying that I know that it's happening, but who's to say that it's not happening somewhere?
Right.
Or that there won't be a group that says, I don't care what you all say, I'm going to do this. We're gonna create a nation state in the middle of the Pacific. We're going to put a bunch of barges there. We're now the nation of utopia. And we think it's okay to do this. Absent a naval flotilla showing up and sinking them, they could do whatever they wanted.
And who's to say we haven't already done that and the aliens are our CRISPR experiences coming back to us through time? Who knows, right? There's all these different.
Yeah. People often say that. I know one of your questions was about genetic intervention with humans. I don't. First of all, I don't think you have to. We've evolved dogs faster than we have cats because dogs have a particular transposable set of transposable elements that allows their genomes to be more plastic than cats. But we've evolved them from wolves into, such a range of capabilities, all just by choice. We are going to breed this thing with that. So, if you were a super species, you don't need to genetically intervene. You just need to make sure that the right groups survive and the right matings occur. Maybe you can do something, but that level of intervention is you don't just like splice in a gene, because there's so many interconnected relationships in genes that it's just we're not there yet. Maybe somebody is. I mean, I always use the example of where is the gene for nest building in birds? There's no gene. It's an instinct, but the instinct is revealed over development of the bird from the egg to the brain structure that forms because of the epigenetic shapes and changes that occur in the DNA of the bird as the program unfolds through development. The genes change, the chromosomes change over time. You need to understand that. If you say, I want this to happen, you need to be able to trace this that happens back through all of the cell types that generate that meta trait. I call them metagenes, that metagene trait, so that you understand you're accomplishing the goal and not causing a problem. And maybe, I think we're going to be there in far shorter order than I would have believed 5 years ago because of the large language models and AI, which tells me that there is a way to do it if you are sufficiently advanced and you would know what to do. That doesn't mean it's happened, but it also tells you that people who are looking to find some genetic evidence of hybrids, it's a lost cause. The changes would be so subtle as to be lost in the noise, I think. Now, of course, if reptilians are real, then obviously you're going to see something very different. But I mean, the they walk amongst us crowd doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that detecting them by whatever technologies we have today would be fruitless. Back in 2015, I was involved with so let's call it a core group of people, scientists who were working on all that. The usual names would come up: Jacques, Hal, Eric, et cetera. These people who are, Jay Stratton, people who were behind the scenes doing all of this stuff and stuff that was secret then, like, we'll talk about this. Suddenly it started coming out. So what I knew in, let's say, 2013, 2014 didn't really kind of come out until 2018. So that's a 5-year lapse. And then suddenly the secrets that I knew and the time interval between me knowing that secret and then everybody suddenly knowing about it shortened. And so that tells me, I mean, literally every day, everything is changing.
Right.
And so, people, the people on Twitter who say, oh, nothing's ever changed, nothing, oh, shut. Oh, there's no evidence. There's lots of evidence. You just haven't taken the time to look at it. Yeah. So shut up. It's like if you don't think that there has been a change, in either again, I went to this party of my 90-year-old mentor with a bunch of scientists and I got cornered by everybody wanting to know about what does Garry know about aliens?
Right.
Less than you think, but more,
more than you know.
More than you know. And, but I never thought of myself in my life as an activist. And seen as being an activist. Or that I needed to be the leader of a movement or anything like that. The only thing that drives me is the anger, but how dare you not allow me to ask the question? And Avi Loeb has the same kind of thing. It's like, you're a scientist. You're not supposed to talk about ideas that way. You're a priest. You're not a scientist. Stop it. If you want to be a priest, or a nun, there's the convent, head over. If you want to believe, in dogma. And so if anything has motivated me into this, it has been that righteous indignation that questions should be asked. But again, I got that from my mentors, and I got that from ideas that I had as a scientist, where somebody said, oh, that won't work. I said, well, okay, you're wrong. Let me prove you wrong.
Right.
And you know what came out of that? All the retroviral technology that does gene therapy, that was me. I came up with that, right? All retroviral technology. I was told by a Nobel Prize winner that it wouldn't work.
Right.
Not my boss, the Nobel Prize winner, when I showed him and another colleague the idea, this guy Warren Pear, they're like, oh wow, let's do it. So, it's like, I think that's what I'm trying to inculcate in people is the right to ask the question and the right to do it your own way for the audience.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Unlimited show. In the meantime, stay tuned for more.